Tell us you're a Nigerian without saying a word. Energy security is one of the most pressing issues for many developing countries like Nigeria. And if there's going to be any meaningful progress, addressing our energy issues is non-negotiable.
I need to see light for my house. Make them do something.
Band A is expensive. I literally have to turn off all my appliances just to reduce costs.
We need light.
Introducing the Energy Outlook, your go-to show for everything energy. Every week, we'll bring you the latest insights, innovation, and in-depth analysis of Nigeria energy sector. From policy discussions to regulatory insights, we will analyze the key decisions influencing growth and sustainability in the energy sector. We'll bring you the human stories behind the headlines, giving you a personal perspective on the broader energy challenges. Join me every Friday at 6 p.m. for the Energy Outlook, your guide to the future of energy, where energy means business. Hello and welcome to the Energy Outlook. My name is Wisdom Chap Jumbo. Yet another week, and we've come to discuss critical issues within the energy sector and, of course, putting you up to speed on all that is happening within the sector. This week, we are discussing the role of open source in closing Africa's energy access gap. Just a couple of weeks ago, leaders gathered at Dar es Salaam in Tanzania for the Africa Energy Summit. You may wonder why we keep, following this summit and the conversations that were held there. It is because at that summit, leaders agreed to, pull 300 million Africans out of the energy poverty, and of course, close the energy access gap for 300 million Africans. What does this mean? It means from data, we know that 600 million Africans lack access to energy. And if we don't close this gap, then we'll have issues even for the continent itself. But before we do that, let me bring you up to speed on the sector and all that is happening. This week in Abuja, Nigeria, the Nigeria International Energy Summit has been ongoing with stakeholders, investors, and different experts, including government and policymakers and regulators, gather at the Nigeria International Energy Summit in Abuja for the last 4 days to discuss critical issues within the sector. One of those issues or one of those conversations that came up that was indeed bold, that they spoke about so much, was the Africa Energy Bank that is set to launch very soon. So yes, you're hearing now that the Africa Energy Bank is set to launch. Can the new Africa Energy Bank power a continent while protecting the planet? So a new Africa Energy Bank will now launch on in March 2025 to fund oil and gas projects across the continent. Backed by the Afrexim Bank and the African Petroleum Producers Organization, APO, the bank will be headquartered in Abuja, Nigeria, with an initial $1.5 billion investment by March. So I think the conversation is, will the game changer be for Africa to have an Africa Energy Bank? Will this be the game changer for the sector? Well, that was discussed in depth at the Nigeria International Energy Summit in Abuja. And if you were there, you will know that those conversations were indeed critical. Still at the summit, President Tinubu encourages investment in Nigeria energy sector, as the government was there to indeed, talk about its laudable achievement in the energy sector since the government took over within the last 1 year. And President Tinubu, who was ably represented at that event, of course, urges investors to tap into opportunities in the Nigerian energy sector. And the president spoke about some of the achievements they've achieved in just a short time. The divestment in the sector was indeed very prominent that they've been talking about. Also, the investments into the sector itself, about $5 billion that's been injected into the energy sector to power it. It was part of what the president spoke, very boldly And we could see that all government officials were there, including the 2 ministers of state for oil and gas, who gave very sounding speeches about what they've been working on for their different ministries and what they've been championing. It's a good thing we see the progress happening within the sector. But something struck me really at that event is that we're talking energy security. And I like how we are owning that conversation on energy security. And some people are raising energy transition. But can we transit really if we can't have energy security for our people? That was some of the bold statements that the government regulators were making, and indeed other energy experts at that event. So President Tinubu was there to also speak on some of those things. On par, the Nigerian government orders DISCOs to publish meter refunds. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, has directed electricity distribution companies, DISCOs, to publish details of refunds to customers who bought meters under the Meter Asset Provider scheme. This move aims to improve transparency and address Nigerians' 7 million metering gap, ensuring consumers receive due reimbursement. The issue of meter is also an important one, and this news this week speaks to what the Nigerian government has ordered for DISCOs to publish meter refunds. You know, I always worry, why is it so much of a stress to indeed get a meter for my house? Why do I have to wait for so long? All of those meter issue, I'm getting someone to the studio soon enough to tell us more information and give us more details on the issue of metering. We'll continue to follow that story. Next of top stories we have is the federal government targets 2.5 billion through gas flare commercialization. The Nigerian government is aiming to attract 2.5 billion in investment through its gas flare commercialization program. This initiative seeks to reduce environmental pollution from gas flaring by converting wasted gas into viable energy resources. By doing so, the program not only addresses environmental concerns, but also opens up avenues for economic growth and energy production. This is coming up. I know a couple of weeks back, I was equally at an event by PE Energy, where they launched a new technology called the multi-phase pump system that will be able to help companies, address this issue of routine gas flaring. So this story, of course, is coming up, and I will be following. I'm bringing someone also to the studio to walk us through the gas sector, indeed, some of this flare conversation, so we can get some more insight. But this is an update we are following. So finally, on our top stories, Dangote refinery reduces petrol prices. This week, we saw that the Dangote refinery has reduced petrol price, which is a premium motor spirit, by 65 naira, bringing it down to 825 naira per liter. The competition is on within the sector, and we can see the downstream. There seems to be quite a good competition now as we see the prices are coming down. Some experts predict that by June, maybe the price of petrol, which is the PMS, might get to 500 naira with what is going on with the competition within the sector. We also know that the marketers, the petrol marketers are saying, look, with the way Dangote is going, they may be forced to sell even much more lower. But, well, we see that, again, those crashes in PMM prices, citizens are happy about it. But we should also look at what are the technical side of it, or what are some of the issues we are not seeing than just price going down. But Dangote has continuously said that they have enough product to feed the country and we don't need to import. And I know there's also an issue before the courts to decide based on the Petroleum Industry Act. Those are our top stories. And when we come back, we'll dive into our conversation for today. Again, our topic is the role of open source to close Africa's energy access gap. So just, open source technology and tools have been an integral part of energy access landscape for some time. However, it is only recently that practitioners, organizations have begun to showcase its benefits, particularly in enhancing cost efficiency and maintaining high quality of some of these technologies. Using open source has its potentials, but to close universal energy access faster. But are there challenges? Are there what we can do? Most people don't even know what open source is. But it's quite a thing I know very well. I mean, last year, I walked around this a lot. We had one of the very first open source in energy access symposium in Abuja, where all practitioners came to discuss some of the good work open source is doing and look at the other side of things. And another event was well supported by the Rural Electrification Agency. But let's go on a short break. And when we come back, I'll bring up my guests who are key experts within the open source space, and they'll be telling us more on this conversation. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly.
Tell us you're a Nigerian without saying a word. Energy security is one of the most pressing issues for many developing countries like Nigeria. And if there's going to be any meaningful progress, addressing our energy issues is non-negotiable.
I need to see light for my house. Make them do something.
Band A is expensive. I literally have to turn off all my appliances just to reduce costs.
We need light.
Introducing the Energy Outlook, your go-to show for everything energy. Every week, we'll bring you the latest insights, innovation, and in-depth analysis of Nigeria energy sector. From policy discussions to regulatory insights, we will analyze the key decisions influencing growth and sustainability in the energy sector. We'll bring you the human stories behind the headlines, giving you a personal perspective on the broader energy challenges. Join me every Friday at 6 p.m. for the Energy Outlook, your guide to the future of energy, where energy means business.
Thank you for staying with us. My name is Wisdom, and this is the Energy Outlook. Yes, so we're discussing open source and the role it can play in closing Africa's energy access gap. And as I said before, open source has its potentials to help us, faster achieve universal energy access. But our conversation today will be looking at what it means, what are some of the challenges with the open source, if any, what are some of the projects, what do people know about open source, and indeed, can it help us close energy access gap in Africa? My guest to join me today is Vivian Barnier, who is the CEO of NAccess, and also joining me is Dr. Dimitris Mentis, who is lead Energy Access Explorer World Resource Institute. The both of them specialize so well in open source, and they'll be helping us make sense of this conversation. Gentlemen, can you hear me?
Yes, Wisdom. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for making time to join. Dimitris, confirm you can hear us too, because I think your voice is down.
Loud and clear. I can hear you very well. Thanks for having us.
Fantastic. All right. I think I'll just start with Vivian, first of all. Vivian, with the work NAccess has been doing, I think it's proper to just ask you this question, first of all. Do you want to tell us a little about NAccess and this open source for those who are hearing for the first time as regards energy access? Can you simplify it? What does it mean, open source for energy access?
Yeah, sure, certainly. Thanks a lot for the invitation, Wisdom. Happy to be here. What is open source in general? I mean, open source, as the name says, means something is open, it's accessible for others and shareable with others and modifiable by others, particularly for energy access. What does it mean? In the energy access sector, as some might know, there's a lot of players around, particularly in the last years, where there's a private sector approach has been promoted for solving the energy access gap in Africa and Nigeria and elsewhere in the world. A lot of private companies, domestic, international, smaller, bigger, or cooperatives, NGOs have arisen to solve the problem. But a lot of these organizations have to do R&D work to actually connect people. The end goal is connecting people. And on this journey, a lot of this R&D work is just repetitive effort, which is very often financed by donor money or public funds. And it doesn't represent, for a lot of the companies, often doesn't represent the business model. It's just work that is required to actually be able to deliver the service to the end customers, to get people connected to power. So, and that's where we believe there's a lot of wasted resources in this approach, where just money is distributed to a lot of different stakeholders, which is a good idea, but not with the purpose to do R&D again and again and again. And we believe there should be much more commonly maintained and shared and developed infrastructure, which then allows the companies to actually focus on their main goal, to connect more people and find a viable business model instead of losing the time and efforts reinventing the wheel. And what does NAccess particularly do about that? We identify gaps and tools in the sector that are beneficial for more than one company, as many as possible, and co-develop them, or if they already exist, help to open source them, maintain them, improve them, and promote them in the sector. This is via online community, via emails, via like promotional work we do, but also via actually tech work that we do, improving the documentations, improving projects themselves, doing symposiums as we did last year and we'll do this year together with WRI. Yeah, that's what NAccess does.
Okay.
And I hope I have shed some clarity on why NAccess is relevant, open source is relevant for achieving access to energy.
All right, thank you, Vivian. I'll just come to you now, Dimitris, real quick. What role does the World Resource Institute play in all of this? And for you, I know you have been very active within the energy access space in Nigeria with the work you do with WRI. But could you tell us more, really, open source? How have you been able at the World Resource Institute to use open source? And do you see the addition it is bringing in helping us to close the energy access gap?
Thanks, Wisdom. And we do really appreciate the opportunity that you are giving us to speak to your audience about a topic which is rather niche and unique, which is open source in the energy access space. Before thinking about open source, let me introduce to your audience the World Resources Institute, which is a global research organization working to improve people's lives, protect nature, and halt climate change. So an independent research organization leveraging data, expertise, and cross-geography reach to influence policy, catalyze change across 3 critical human systems: food, land, water, cities, and energy. Within the energy program, there is a strong focus on energy access and equitable development. So our focus is not only on expanding access to energy services, but making sure energy is an important means to achieving critical development outcomes on healthcare, education, livelihoods, economic opportunities. As you mentioned in your introduction, there are still close to 600 million people in the region that have no access to electricity. Nigeria, about 85 million people that do not have access to electricity, and over 150 million people that still cook with polluting fuels. This means no access to modern healthcare. This means no access to modern education, modern agriculture, and livelihoods. Where are these underserved communities, and how shall they be best served? As soon as we are asking the question where, we need geographic information systems, like Google Maps, for instance, right? That can help us understand the situation on the ground, both challenges as well as opportunities. We have to appreciate that resources in the energy access space are constrained, are limited. The vast majority of the solutions in the space are proprietary solutions, which are costly. We have been developing an open source geographic information system, which we call the Energy Access Explorer, which enables different stakeholders, government agencies, the likes of the Rural Electrification Agency in Nigeria, businesses, clean energy businesses, the mini-grid developers, solar home system providers, clean cooking technology providers, financiers, some of the multilateral development banks, development practitioners in the health, education, agriculture sectors to utilize the power of granular data, granular analytics to identify these underserved communities, A, and B, ways to supply electricity or energy services to these communities. Through this open source initiative, the Energy Access Explorer, we've been able to equip over 30,000 practitioners with a tool, with a platform that allows them to generate a customized analysis for market intelligence. If you're a business, where can I expand my markets using a data-informed approach to develop plans, electricity plans, energy access plans, clean cooking strategies and roadmaps, health electrification plans, and so on and so forth. Typically, the vast majority of the stakeholders in the cross-sectoral energy for development space have been utilizing proprietary solutions. And again, the vast majority of the stakeholders in this space have been left outside energy planning conversations. So open source is critical in order to inform conversations, plans, strategic documents, roadmaps with regards to the expansion of energy services. Let me pause here, but really pleased that this conversation is taking place. And we do indeed need to advocate more about the importance of open source solutions in the energy access space if we are interested in bridging the significant energy access gap in 2025.
Okay, thank you, Dimitris.
Back to you.
I'll just stay with you for a bit. Now, what we know is, I mean, the adoption or acceptance of open source is a bit really slow, as even some of the practitioners have not fully understood how they can indeed use it. Is this a challenge for you, and especially as we are looking at closing the energy access gap for 300 million Africans? As we go forward to this, are these some of the challenges you see? Because even in that summit in Dar es Salaam, we didn't see a prominent conversation around open source at the summit, but we know that it's an opportunity that we can leverage to close the energy access gap indeed faster. Is adoption one of the challenges you see for open source, or are there other ones?
Very good, very, very good question, Wisdom. Indeed, the adoption is slow of open source solutions. And more broadly speaking, I would say for planning solutions. And this is one of the reasons why we joined forces with an Access Foundation, trying to bring together the open source and energy access communities. More specifically, let's say that you, Wisdom, come up with a brilliant open source solution in the energy access space, which helps stakeholders identify the optimal ways to electrify underserved communities. And WRI, or an Access Foundation, comes up with another brilliant solution. We end up introducing very similar solutions to the exact same end beneficiaries. Think, for instance, a Ministry of Power or a Ministry of Energy in another country, a Rural Electrification Agency, etc. This confusion leads to delayed decisions with regards to the technology of choice, with regards to the tool, the planning tool, that the agencies, the local agencies, shall select in order to develop plans. This delayed decision leads to delayed planning processes. Delayed planning leads, in turn, to delayed implementation of the energy access targets. So here, the open source community, and more broadly speaking, the community of solution developers has a significant role to play. And the smaller open source community, we need to make sure we do coordinate as effectively as possible. Coming back to the number you mentioned, which comes from Mission 300. 300 million connections, according to Mission 300, in 5 years' time. And then another 300 million people, which is not captured under Mission 300. So there's significant opportunity for multiple solutions to contribute across geographies in order to bridge the gap. As you can see, this is a very small community of solution developers, which is looking at addressing a significant challenge across multiple geographies, right? We can speak about the open source and energy access symposium in a while, of course, together with Vivian.
All right. Okay, so I'll just go to Vivian now before we go on our break. Vivian, with the work NSS is doing, I want you to talk about a practical example of open source projects that have done change the game or change the dynamics of this conversation within the energy access space. Because I know NSS, there are a lot of projects NSS has been working on. So that our viewers can indeed understand what we're talking about in practical terms. If there are some projects that you think NSS has funded or supported within the open source space that has indeed changed, the story as we go towards closing the energy access gap.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Wisdom. And I surely have a couple of ones. I would try to limit myself a bit. But the one great example, which is a pretty techy issue, I would say, but that open source still had a very significant impact there, is the OpenPayGo token, which the people that do like distributed renewable energies in like small scale PayGo systems, solar home systems, the PayGo space, and that you need tokens to activate or deactivate the assets. Now, basically, the scheme is you pay a daily, monthly, or weekly fee to buy a solar system over a couple of years or months, depending on the scheme. And only if you pay regularly, you get your tokens, and then you basically make the payments, and then at the end, it's yours. But this encryption and decryption of these tokens was something that there were, and there still are, different ways of doing it, but it's nothing that is really rocket science or something, or what is required to be not interoperable across different manufacturers and loan platform providers. So we supported development of the OpenPayGo token, which really was a game changer, because now most loan platform providers, which are relevant to managing such projects and distribution mechanisms, are interoperable through this OpenPayGo token. Not only the OpenPayGo token, there are generally the OpenPayGo ecosystem and also the Angasa Nexus channel and so, but that's different approaches of open source in collaboration that have significantly improved the efficiency of the sector, and by that unlocked funds that were then used to deploy cheaper and better and more connections. I think that's a great example of success of open source that we have been involved in. Also, we have a customer management system, a micropower manager that we haven't initially developed, which has been developed by a private company for itself initially in Ensus and later open source as well. And we are supporting this, and we are seeing a lot of traction. There are several companies using it, and there are more and more requesting it, and it was designed for mini grids. Now there are more and more PayGo companies that want to use it as well. And that's a great time.
And PayGo, you mean pay as you go, so that they have more context to it. PayGo, you mean pay as you go.
PayGo, yes, only, yeah. So
okay.
Exactly. When I say PayGo, I mean pay as you go. And sorry, I'm talking too much abbreviations. Yeah, if we say PayGo, we mean pay as you go. Yes. And more pay as you go companies and distributors are also willing to use this open source CRM and monitoring system, management system, which we provide, and we see a lot of traction there. And then we have also battery management systems, which are super important for lithium-ion batteries, particularly, and we have supported the design. That's an open source hardware, which is particularly interesting because it's not open source software exists like for decades, and like most of what we do today in the internet wouldn't work without open source, by the way. Like most servers, a lot of them have any like Linux kernel running behind it, which is open source now. And open source hardware is something much more nascent, but still very important. And battery management systems, all people that use lithium-ion batteries should or want to use battery management, particularly if you have second life lithium-ion batteries. And we have supported the development and pushing the further improvement of one of those. And we're getting a lot of requests from companies in e-mobility or in having like productive use, a bit larger assets that need to run in the night. So they need the battery and they run on lithium-ion. And a lot of these particular domestic companies are looking into this battery management because in the end, there's so many of those from different manufacturers, but very often they don't fit exactly your needs. So the people end up developing again and again battery management systems, and just instead of having one baseline which they can modify on, where they just have to make the 20% adjustment.
Okay, but
and yeah, these are projects where I see they're really game changing because the companies can save money while adopting them.
But if I will ask you, we see that many of the players are still reinventing the wheel. They are not really, looking at open source, and adoption is a bit slow. I mean, from what I understand, open source within the space is. So, for you, what do you think is still the challenge for adoption, or how can we, faster, accelerate the whole adoption of open source? Because it should be something we see. I haven't been in the space for a long time. I know that some of these technologies and systems, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a way we can, better use shared resources to solve the same problem. So for you, how can we better fast track or improve the acceptance or adoption of open source for energy access?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, very important point. I think that there are a couple of points there. I mean, you asked me first for the reasons. I would first go to the reason and then say how we can tackle them. I mean, one reason of slow adoption is certainly that there's a misunderstanding what open source is. People, particularly private companies, and sometimes not the ones that run the companies, but the investors, hear open source and like, oh, okay, I will lose my money. There's nothing to earn with it. Or the other things that people say, oh, open source is like this DIY stuff. You can use it like for your hobby project, but you can't really use it for like commercial operations, which is totally wrong. As I said earlier, no, most servers need some open source parts. And there are actually large energy providers in Europe, like distribution grid operators that commonly maintain open source tools to operate the grids and all that. So that this is all reality. No, open source works in commercial operations, but there is the lack of understanding of that. It's particularly in our sector, which is like investor driven. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding what open source means. Also, people sometimes think, okay, then I have to open source everything which I do. That's not true. I mean, you can, for certain things in your operations, it does make total sense to have this open source maintained with others. You can keep everything was super interesting and data and all that was relevant to your business completely for yourself, and it's all good. And you can also make some developments which are closed source for yourself because you need them, all good. There's nothing bad about it, while you still leverage on open source. And that works pretty nicely together. And there's another misunderstanding that there are business models which are based on open source. So you can actually provide an open source software, an open source tool, and then sell the service on adopting it to the specific needs. Because that's what because people could do it by their own, but often they don't have the means to do it, but they still want an open source tool because they want to benefit from the learnings over time from others, from the contribution from others, but they want a customization. So you can sell that, or you can sell software as a service, the hosting service, where the software itself is for free, or some features are costing, but the main feature is for free. I mean, there are a lot of different business models that you could run. So I think that's the one thing, misunderstanding. So what can we do? We have to educate. I mean, I don't know, like educate, like thing on the fingers. You don't know what you do, but like promote it. Say, guys, explain there are commercial ways of using open source. They're a good example how that works. They're very good example in public and in private sector where open source has been used and is being used successfully to run operations, particularly in the energy sector and in the energy access more specifically. I think that's the one thing we have to do. And another thing of adoption is, particularly talking about us and our project, is we need always to strive in improving the adoptability and the documentations, which is a general thing in open source. You need to, if you want people to be able to adopt as easily by their own, you need to do very high quality, detailed documentation, what needs effort, what needs money. So you need a funder that believes in open source and supports that activity. So that's the one challenge. We have to get funders supporting these adoption efforts.
Yeah, we'll talk shortly about funders, but we'd like to take a quick break. When we come back, we know last year, the very first open source in energy access symposium held in Abuja, we'll get some feedback from our guest on how that symposium went and what were some of the takeaways, especially as we look at this issue of adoption for players within the sector and how they believe it can be a good game changer to close the energy access gap. Don't go, stay with us, we'll be back in a minute.
Nigeria, by extension Africa, battles a growing youthful population and with little or no meaningful engagement leaves a ticking time bomb on our hands. We are a blessed continent with great wealth, both in people and material. Our focus on ways remains driving conversations that affects us all. Topics in the news, social concerns, politics, leadership, governance, empowerment, resource management, conflict management, finance, SME sustainability, technological innovation, food security, health, education, brain drain, our well-being, citizenship, and much more. Our goal is to continuously drive these conversations, keep them burning at the table to effect a positive change both for our nation and continent. Ways, what are you saying, has a secret ingredient that completes the conversation every single episode, and that ingredient is you. Our past conversations shaped our yesterday. To shape our tomorrow, we must keep talking. So, I want to hear you. Be a part of our live conversations Mondays through Fridays. And let's all have our say.
All right, welcome back. This is still the Energy Outlook, and my name is Wisdom Chap Jumbo. We've been discussing open source and the role it can play to close Africa's energy access gap. And I have my guests here who have been discussing with me, some of the challenges and how it has been able to support and what we think open source can do. I have Dimitris Mentis with me and Vivian Bania, who work actively within the open source space and been doing quite a lot of work. So I'll just touch with Vivian before I move to Dimitris. I know that, or we know, that the Open Source Energy Access Symposium held in Abuja last year, and it was well attended and well supported even by the World Bank, also by other partners like the REA and others. Vivian, could you tell us about the open source last year? What were some of the major takeaways? Because we know there's another one coming up this year in Nairobi this time around. But before we go to this year, let's talk about last year. Did the symposium solve this issue of adoption or promoting it within practitioners for you? What were the takeaways, if you want to share with us? Then I'll come to Dimitris. Okay, Vivian, I think you're muted.
Am I muted?
Okay, you're back. I can hear you now. Go on, please. Go on.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, but I said that's perfect. We should both talk about it, Dimitris and I, because we have different key takeaways, I think. But one big one, which I think became very clear, is we need to be stronger in community building, of open source and NG access. This can be one big community, or whether different communities on particular topics, which some are more like planning focused or more like policy focused, while others are more developer or software developer, the others are more hardware developer focused. We need to involve more the local and existing open source community in the African continent, which exists and which we've invited and which we're speaking. And we actually now have people from OSCA, the Open Source Community Africa, connected with our energy access open source community, which is great, but that's something that we needed to do. That's one learning, and we need to do it more. Another, and the learning, community building. And the question, did it solve the adoption by itself? No, certainly not. Did it help to drive more adoption? Yes. But what it shows, we need more of such events. We need more of such in-person events and a remote community, because it's a remote sector with a lot of people everywhere in the world acting. But having both working hand in hand, remote community and in-person event that feed into each other is a very important element to drive adoption also, and to show the mission and the impact of open source for energy access. I think that might be the two key takeaways.
Two key takeaways. All right. So let me go to Dimitris. As you said, he also has his own takeaways. Dimitris, what were the takeaways for you from that symposium? If you want to share with us, because I know you were also very involved.
Thanks, Wisdom. And as we mentioned last year, we couldn't think of a better partner to jointly organize this symposium than an Access Foundation. It's been a pleasure working closely with an Access Foundation, and of course we look forward to this year's event as well. Many thanks go to you as well, Wisdom, for being a wonderful MC. Coming to the key takeaways, indeed, very well attended event. We got over 150 participants. This is, again, a very niche topic, right? And in these couple of days that we all came together, synergies between solution providers, solution users, so the practitioners, whether it's government agencies, businesses, and donors, the ones that support the development of these solutions, have been identified in literally record time. We would have needed months in order to come up with new collaboration opportunities. Still to this day, almost 10 months after the inaugural symposium, which took place in Abuja, I'm hearing about collaboration opportunities and practical synergies. We've got numerous requests for in-person training workshops when it comes to the Energy Access Explorer, and I'm sure the same is the case for other tools that were introduced during the symposium. I want to say one thing, if I may, Wisdom, that there was a reason why we selected Abuja, Nigeria, for being the first the first country that would host this particular symposium. The opportunity for growing energy services for development is significant, larger than anywhere else in the world. But also, the open source community, as Vivian mentioned, is a very vibrant one. The second one will be taking place in Nairobi in a few months' time. We can speak about that in a while. So the fact that we're able to bring together the ones that develop solutions, the ones that use solutions, and the ones that support the development of these solutions or finance the development of these solutions has been a key takeaway for us. One of the things that we heard during the symposium from a couple of the attendees is the following. I've been developing this solution I've been developing such a solution over the past 11 months, an open source solution. Another attendee, same session. If I knew someone else has been developing such an open source solution, I wouldn't have spent 11 months working on developing a very similar solution, right? So this is the power of the symposium. This is the power of bringing together this community. We didn't solve all collaboration challenges, but we are coming up with a collaboration roadmap.
Okay.
We are trying to reduce some of the collaboration challenges through this symposium, through this community building. Back to you, Wisdom. Yes.
All right. I mean, a good one. Like you said, I was there myself. I think one of the takeaways for me is I learned a lot around the role the academia can play in all of this, and those conversations with the academias, I think, was indeed a very good for my knowledge, and I was glad we had them. But I want to ask you, what's going to be different for 2025 symposium that's going to happen in Nairobi? What's going to be different from last year? What are the new changes participants should expect in Nairobi this time for the symposium, so that it can be different for what they saw last year in Abuja? What's going to be different this year? Dimitris, that's for you.
Shall I go, Vivian? Would you like to go first?
No, Dimitris, you. I would like to hear from you first.
That's okay. Yeah. So first of all, we would. All right, we would be keen to discuss ways open source could help advance Mission 300. So what you asked earlier is very timely, is very relevant. So it's one of the new things that will be added in the agenda. One of the sessions will be called OSI's Big Five, Open Source and Energy Access Symposium Big Five, going through the entire value chain, if I can say. So from resource planning, from resource assessment to energy planning, to implementation, to financing, to monitoring. So solution developers will be able to present their solutions at our posters/product safari, as we call it. We'll have people talking about open source policies. We'll have people talking about ways we can improve communication of open source for impact, for growing impact. And then there will be some sessions coming back. For instance, the role of academia. This is a very critical topic that needs to be brought up across geographies. And local academic institutions are essential for adopting and adapting open source solutions across geographies, whether these geographies are countries or states in the case of Nigeria, counties in the case of Kenya. Let me pause here and give Vivian the opportunity to add.
All right, Vivian, just as you're thinking about adding, I will just add a few more questions to yours. So the donors that we need to understand open source, how do we get them in the room, especially for this year? Because if the donors understand what the open source is, and how and well it's supporting energy access, they will also be in the know of how their monies and fundings can go. Will that be something we'll see this year? And also, what are the other expectations from participants this year at the symposium?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So let's start with the donors question. How to get the donors into the room? We are increasingly focusing on inviting donors more than in the last year possibly, and going particularly to the ones that we know that have an affinity for open source already, not necessarily have fully adopted open source policies, as like the, how's it called, like the first provers. No, if you have a critical mass of a few funders that actually show their interest and they believe in open source, it's very likely to have others to follow. It's easier than to have an event which has an open source name and then invite the ones that you know that are the least ones that you will convince, but eventually you will still convince them. But you should start with the ones, and there are also big ones, no? I mean, there are big ones that already adopt open source policies, and the idea is to have enough of these showing their presence and sharing the word and sharing the mission of open source in public funding or in private funding and philanthropic funding, and having sessions that are particularly targeted to how donors and policymakers can actually influence open source and push for open source and collaboration. And secondly, what else is expected? We will, as I said, one of the learning is we need to focus more on community building. We will have more sessions and work that focuses on actually community building on site, and also preparing for then offline, online communities, remote community work. And another takeaway was also that we have to create more room for, because we talk about collaborations, and collaboration needs that people talk to each other, network. We will provide more dedicated room to specific discussions, to very concrete collaborations, and allow and push to people really create and work on actual collaboration, not just talk about them, but make them real and give the space for that. And I think that's an expectation that we have and we will make possible. And again, showcasing solutions and not only showcasing them as we have it possibly done in the past, but showcasing them with really getting people onboarded to tools, like giving them a chance to interact with the tools already and or the solutions. It's not all tools, some solutions you might call it tools or solutions, to get them already and see the benefit of them and getting initial support on how to use them.
Okay. All right. As we wrap up, I mean, we're already out of time, so we're just going to wrap up. And maybe your final thoughts, as you just share, maybe in one minute, is what can policy change? If there's going to be a policy change to support open access, what should it be? That question just popped in my head just right about now. I would like you to just use 1 minute each to respond to that. And finally, give us more details. We know the symposium will happen in Nairobi. When is the date and how can we register? Just let's answer this in 1 minute because we're out of time, so we can wrap up. Vivian, you want to start? Then I go to Dimitris.
Sorry, can you?
Yes.
The initial question I didn't hear.
I was saying
there was
policy. If we're going to, if there will be policy changes to support open access, any specifics on what it should be? Is it what we need now, or we should just try to build more on the community first and get people to understand what it means? But if there could be policy changes to support open access, open source, what will it be? That was my first question.
Okay, I will go very quick. It would be including policies that public money invested in R&D should result in open source results and not closed source results as a mantra, like pushing that. Another policy should respect more, and which includes also more standardization, so that development should be more standardized, using open source as an example, and also enhancing and obliging different beneficiaries of public funding or public initiatives to collaboration, to work and speak to each other. This naturally will, it's possibly not in the end open source, but it will also push to more open source. Like public policymakers have the chance to push the implementers to do more collaborative and more open source by forcing that. That's the one question, and I would answer also the when. It's in Nairobi, 11th to 13th of June. Oh, and you register on ocs.org.
ocs.org. Okay. Dimitris, same question on policy, and then we'll just wrap up for the evening.
Yes. So policies, wisdom need to be locally owned.
Okay.
Right?